The Volari mothership hung over the town like an iron eclipse, blotting out the late afternoon sun. Its surface shimmered with a cold sheen, 1,000 panels flexing and pulsing like scales. To the farmers standing ankle-deep in dust along the road, it was both alien and grotesquely indifferent, as if the sky itself had decided to erase them. Admiral Xylan surveyed the landscape from his command deck, the glass floor beneath him projecting live tactical feeds. His multiple eyes narrowed with a kind of practiced boredom. Another insignificant world, another scattering of creatures clinging to soil and superstition. The Dominion had purged hundreds of such settlements, and the patterns never varied. Panic, retreat, crude weapons raised in futility, then silence. To him, Earth was simply another entry on the long ledger of obedience enforced. "Proceed," he said, his voice carrying the resonance of authority. His officers, armored in polished bone-like plating, moved with a ceremonial precision. Plasma batteries rotated, targeting the town's modest grid of houses, silos, and roads. Down below, life had not stopped. Sheriff Daniel Briggs leaned against his cruiser, squinting at the looming shadow. His jaw worked at a piece of gum he hadn't even noticed he was chewing. Around him, farmers, shopkeepers, and high school athletes pressed together, their fear evident, their breaths ragged. Yet Daniel didn't shout orders. He only said quietly, "Get underground. Now." Beside him stood Elena Vasquez, a former Army engineer who had retired to raise her daughter in quiet obscurity. Her fingers traced the edge of her jacket pocket, feeling the outline of the device she had promised herself she'd never use. Her daughter had already been sent into the reinforced tunnels beneath the church, the same tunnels the town had secretly expanded under federal instruction. Elena's gaze rose to the ship blotting the sky. She knew the playbook: overwhelm the enemy with arrogance, scorch the surface, leave nothing recognizable. She also knew that tonight might be different. The first beams lashed downward, slamming into the grain silos and erupting into plumes of molten steel and smoke. A chorus of terrified screams tore across the street. Dust rained, windows cracked, and the Volari officers marked the strike with detached murmurs. To them, this was already finished. Xylan leaned back into his throne-like chair. "Observe how fragile they are. Even their structures recoil." He tapped his claw against the console. "Within hours, nothing will remain." Another mark erased, but something did remain. From the fractured earth near the riverbed, panels shifted aside, and a tower slid upward with hydraulic certainty. It was lean, angular, coated in heat-dampening alloys. A railgun the size of a freight train leveled at the sky, locking onto the plasma battery above. The farmers, who moments ago had been clutching one another, now watched in stunned silence as the weapon hummed with electromagnetic charge. Elena's voice broke the air. "Brace yourselves." The first shot cracked like thunder, a silver streak ripping through atmosphere. A Volari cannon platform burst apart, its wreckage spiraling down in burning arcs. On the mothership's deck, alarms pierced the calm. Officers scrambled to recalibrate defenses, their polished composure fractured. Xylan's eyes widened, not with fear, but with disbelief. "They cannot possibly," he stopped himself. The impossible had already happened. Daniel Briggs guided townsfolk toward the church basement, his movement steady, unhurried. Inside, he carried his own disbelief, but he refused to show it. He knew that courage was often nothing more than refusing to let terror speak first. As he ushered a family down the steps, he whispered to himself, "So this is it. The day the world stops hiding." The Volari retaliated. Swarms of drones cascaded from the mothership, their wings like shards of obsidian. They descended on the town in a storm of red light. Yet before they touched soil, cloaked drones of human design rose from hidden silos and barns, swarming upward like a counterplague. The air ignited with collisions, tracer fire, and the whine of engines. Elena tapped her communicator, her voice suddenly clipped and professional. "Command, this is Site Epsilon. Engagement confirmed." They took the bait. In orbit, General Reyes stood over a holographic table, watching data cascade in precise lines. His expression was stone, but his heart hammered with the weight of years of preparation. At last, humanity's long patience bore fruit. "Maintain discipline," he ordered. "Do not reveal everything at once. Let them bleed arrogance first." Xylan felt the balance shift, subtle yet undeniable. For the first time in countless campaigns, his enemy had not simply cowered. They had drawn blood. He slammed his claw onto the console. "Intensify bombardment. Show them what defiance costs." But more hidden turrets rose from the countryside. Another railgun spat its fury, slicing through the belly of a cruiser. The farmers who had once whispered prayers now stood in awe, their terror morphing into something fiercer, a trembling pride. Elena's hands shook as she reloaded a sidearm. She might never fire, her engineer's mind calculating probabilities, risks, failures. She felt fear claw at her, not for herself, but for her daughter below ground. Yet through that fear burned a steadier flame, the conviction that survival demanded sacrifice. Daniel Briggs, wiping ash from his brow, caught her eye. For a brief second, two strangers shared the same thought. We will not vanish quietly. Above them, Xylan's officers began murmuring doubts. This was no ordinary purge. The humans had prepared, had waited. He silenced them with a glare, but could not silence the weight pressing into his own chest. Another railgun blast seared through the sky. Another cruiser fell. In the church basement, children huddled with wide eyes as muffled booms shook dust from the rafters. Elena's daughter clutched her stuffed rabbit, asking in a whisper if the sky would ever be blue again. Her mother's answer, though unspoken, lived in her resolve. The town was on fire, yet within that fire something stirred, defiance, not despair. Humanity had chosen this ground, chosen this moment, and they were not the prey the Volari believed. As the mothership's shadow loomed, Daniel Briggs raised his radio and spoke with calm finality. They wanted a town. Instead, they woke the world. And for the first time in centuries of conquest, Admiral Xylan found himself wondering if the predators had stepped into a trap far deadlier than prey. General Reyes stood in the command chamber buried deep beneath the Rockies, the room dim except for the shifting holograms that mapped the sky above. The battle unfolding over the small town was not a disaster, not chaos. It was exactly what he had prayed for. Proof that humanity's patience, its silence, had been mistaken for weakness. His face was carved with sleepless years, eyes shadowed, hair gone to iron. Yet as the Volari fleet struggled against Earth's hidden defenses, he felt no triumph, only inevitability. Around him, aides relayed updates in clipped tones. Railguns fired from concealed silos, drones launched from farmland disguised as silos and barns, orbital satellites angled for precise strikes. The Volari had expected a soft belly and found sharpened teeth instead. Reyes gave no speeches, no flourishes. He merely nodded. Maintain rhythm. Don't reveal all assets. Let them wonder what else is waiting. His voice was measured, a blade dulled to calmness, so it wouldn't cut his own men. In the church basement, Elena cradled her daughter's head against her shoulder as explosions rattled the stone. Dust fell like ash, and every tremor made the children flinch. She whispered soft reassurances, her eyes fixed on the low ceiling as though she could see through it, as though sheer will might keep the roof from collapsing. She had trained soldiers to endure worse, but no training prepared her for the fragile weight of her child trembling in her arms. She had chosen this town because it promised obscurity, safety. Now obscurity had been a mask, and safety a lie. Sheriff Briggs moved among the evacuees, passing out canteens, steadying shaking hands. He carried no illusions of grandeur. He was no soldier, just a man tasked with keeping order in a town that had become bait. But there was something in his calm manner, the way he crouched to meet people's eyes, the way his voice never rose even when the earth did, that steadied them. In the flicker of lantern light, he looked less like a lawman and more like an anchor. Above them, Admiral Xylan's voice thundered through his ship. Ridicule. They dare mock us with these toys. Deploy all reserves. Burn everything. His command staff exchanged wary glances. They had seen towns erased without resistance, seen civilizations fall in a single day. This was different. Yet fear of their admiral's wrath outweighed doubt. Orders were carried out, drones released in a black storm. The storm met fire. Human drones rose invisibly from the clouds, cloaking fields, tearing away at the last instant. The collision lit the heavens in a kaleidoscope of destruction. Farmers in the fields, hiding in trenches, looked upward with a kind of horrified awe as alien machines dropped from the sky in flaming fragments. Elena felt her communicator vibrate at her hip. She stepped into a corner, shielding the glow with her hand. "This is Vasquez. Confirmed engagement. Site Epsilon has performed as intended," came Rhea's voice, stripped of any pretense of warmth. "We need them to believe this is improvisation. Hold your ground. Reinforcements are inbound but will not reveal themselves unless absolutely required." She hesitated, eyes falling on her daughter curled on a bench. "Understood." Reyes closed the channel and stared at the map, the shifting dots of enemy positions. His mind drifted to the years before this night, when the Volari raids had first begun, when humanity had played the role of prey, when they had lost colonies and outposts and pretended it was all they had to give. Every loss, every humiliation, had been tolerated because patience was the sharper weapon. Now the blade was being unsheathed. Xylan watched another cruiser disintegrate under a railgun strike. His disbelief hardened into anger. Primitive, yet precise.
How?
His voice cracked with the demand. None of his officers dared answer. His gaze fell on the tactical map, where red icons vanished one after another. He forced a hiss of contempt, though his heart beat faster. They cannot sustain this. They are still vermin dressed as predators. Yet the words felt like a brittle shield against the truth clawing at his mind. On the ground, Briggs guided another wave of townsfolk down into the tunnels, then emerged back into the smoke. He spotted Elena standing in the ruins of the main street, her eyes fixed upward. "You should be below with her," he said. "She needs me alive, not buried under rubble," she replied, her tone sharper than she intended. Then softer. "So do you." The sheriff gave a weary smile. "I figure this is the last place in the world where running would make any difference." For a moment, two ordinary people, one who had chosen to leave war, one who had never sought it, stood together beneath the shriek of skies aflame. Neither claimed heroism. Both simply refused to yield. Another railgun roared. Another alien ship fell. In the command chamber, Reyes finally allowed himself a single breath of satisfaction. Not victory, never that. Just confirmation. Humanity was no longer reacting. Humanity was dictating. He studied the holograms, the shrinking Volari presence. Let them retreat if they want. They need to carry the story home, that Earth bleeds predators. Above, Xylan tightened his claws around the armrest of his throne. The planet had become a snare, every move anticipated, every strike countered. Yet still, he could not imagine true parity. The Dominion had endured for centuries, had consumed civilizations across the stars. These humans could not possibly overturn that. Still, in the back of his mind, the first seeds of unease pushed through his arrogance. Down in the tunnels, Elena kissed her daughter's forehead and whispered a promise she wasn't sure she could keep. Briggs leaned against the wall near the stairwell, hand resting on his revolver, though he knew it was laughably obsolete against what raged above. Both heard the earth shudder again, both lifted their eyes to the trembling ceiling, and both shared the same grim certainty. This battle was not the end. It was the beginning of something larger, far more terrible. Outside, fire consumed the horizon. The mothership's shadow still loomed, but no longer absolute. For the first time in Volari history, the prey had bitten back, and the predators bled. Admiral Xylan sat alone in the viewing chamber of his flagship, its walls alive with projected images dredged from human data networks. He had demanded an archive of their wars, expecting primitive clashes of iron and powder. Instead, he watched cities consumed in nuclear fire, trenches drowning in mud and corpses, guerrillas vanishing into jungles only to strike again with ruthless cunning. One recording showed a town reduced to ash in seconds, Hiroshima, the caption read, and his chest constricted at the cold efficiency. Another displayed grainy footage of endless convoys of tanks crawling across deserts, entire skies filled with bombers. The humans had carved destruction into their very history, wearing it like a second skin. His claws clicked against the armrest, the rhythm betraying unease. "They wage war as though it were breath," he murmured. Officers standing near the doorway shifted uncomfortably. For cycles uncounted, the Dominion had prided itself on its cruelty, its superiority. But what he saw in those archives was not cruelty. It was endurance. These creatures had survived by making war an inheritance. He closed the feed, but the images lingered like phantoms behind his eyelids. In the tunnels beneath the battered town, Elena moved among the huddled civilians. She whispered small comforts, her voice carrying steadiness even when her hands trembled. The children clung to her, their trust as heavy a burden as any weapon. Briggs lingered nearby, his revolver holstered, but his posture vigilant. He spoke to her when the noise of battle briefly lulled. "They look at you like you've got answers." She forced a thin smile. "I don't. I only know we can't give up the ground we've already held." Briggs studied her, then nodded. "Sometimes that's enough." His words were simple, but they settled into her bones. She was no general, no elected leader, but tonight she had become something larger, proof that humanity's spirit was not reserved for soldiers alone. Far above them, Xylan stood before the Volari High Council via shimmering projection. The chamber stretched like a cathedral, counselors robed in authority. Their voices rolled with derision when he detailed Earth's resistance. One counselor sneered, "A colony of insects, nothing more. You exaggerate their threat." Another added, "Exterminate the town, scour the continent, and this nuisance will fade." Xylan's jaw tightened. He should have echoed them, should have protected his standing with words of arrogance. Instead, he found himself confessing a sliver of truth. They are not like the others. Every attempt to crush them has met with equal and opposite force. They anticipate us. They study us as we study them. The chamber rippled with laughter, dismissive and scornful. "Then crush them harder," a counselor said. He lowered his eyes, but inside, a fracture widened. He knew what they did not. The Dominion's strength was built on intimidation, on overwhelming foes unprepared to endure. But the humans were prepared, and every day of underestimation handed them advantage. In the command bunker, General Reyes listened to casualty reports delivered in hushed voices. Even with victories, the cost was high. Families displaced, soldiers lost in ambushes, drones shot from the sky. He accepted every report with the same iron calm, but once the room fell quiet, he let his shoulders sag. He thought of his own son, gone years ago to an early Volari raid, a death that had carved purpose into him sharper than any blade. Tonight was vindication, yes, but it was also a reminder. Every success was paid in blood, and he carried every drop. "Sir," an aide said softly, "do we press advantage?" Reyes lifted his head, eyes burning with resolve. "We don't press. We strike. Every hesitation will be read as weakness." He straightened, voice regaining its steel. They must learn that humanity does not fight to endure. Humanity fights to finish. In orbit, the first coordinated counteroffensive began. Wormholes opened like wounds in the void, spilling human fleets into Volari-held sectors. Squadrons of drones surged forward, weaving through enemy fire with machine precision. Railguns on distant asteroids fired slugs faster than light could track, each strike collapsing cruisers in bursts of molten metal. The Volari formations, drilled in predictable patterns, faltered under the onslaught of unorthodox tactics. Xylan received the reports one after another, outposts seized, fleets routed, strongholds burning. His command deck filled with the acrid scent of ozone as systems overloaded under the strain. His officers' eyes no longer gleamed with arrogance, but flickered with something he had not seen in them before: Fear. He felt it himself, heavy and undeniable, yet he masked it with fury. Hold formation. We are the Dominion. We do not yield. His voice thundered, but the echo sounded hollow. Back on Earth, Briggs watched the night sky flash with silent battles far above, each flare a promise that the fight was no longer confined to their town. He sat on the church steps for a moment, revolver in his lap, Elena beside him. "Do you ever wonder if we should have kept hiding?" he asked, the question spilling from weariness rather than doubt. She shook her head. "Hiding only works if the hunter loses interest. They never would." She looked at him then, her eyes shadowed but steady. "Better they learn fear now, before they learn we were willing to cower forever." He absorbed her words, then lifted his gaze to the heavens where streaks of fire marked alien ships breaking apart. For the first time, he allowed himself to believe they might survive. Not just survive, but prevail. On the flagship, Xylan clenched his claws until they bled. He had mocked, he had dismissed, but the truth gnawed at him relentlessly. Humanity was not prey. Humanity was war incarnate, a species that turned suffering into discipline and loss into steel. He had told his counselors that humans studied their enemies. What he had not admitted was that they also remembered, and they carried every memory like ammunition. Another transmission reached him. The human's voice was calm, devoid of bluster. "You are not facing a colony. You are facing Earth. Withdraw or be erased." The words chilled him more than any weapon. Not because they were a threat, but because they were spoken with certainty. He stared at the comms display, his heart's pounding, and for the first time in his long career, Admiral Xylan hesitated. Down below, Elena tucked her daughter into a cot amid the crowded shelter. Briggs lingered at the entrance, eyes on the shifting shadows beyond the door. And in the bunker miles away, Reyes prepared orders for a strike that would carry humanity's defiance far beyond Earth's skies. The battle for the town was no longer about survival. It had become the opening act of something far greater, a war that would not end until one civilization broke entirely. And though the night was far from over, the shape of its ending had begun to reveal itself, humanity rising, inexorable, while their enemies struggled to comprehend the storm they had unleashed. The Dominion was crumbling. What had begun as a surgical purge of a single Earth town had metastasized into a war that spread like wildfire across the stars. Xylan's flagship limped through fractured space lanes, its once perfect hull scarred and blistered from relentless strikes. He no longer barked commands with arrogance. Now his voice carried the weight of a man staring into inevitability. His officers whispered among themselves, doubt mutating into dread. The humans were not chasing victory with fury. They pursued it with method, with patience, with the dispassionate hand of executioners. General Reyes stood in the command bunker, eyes fixed on a holographic display of the Volari core systems. The battlefront had collapsed inward. Colonies once loyal to the Dominion now rioted, emboldened by the spectacle of their masters faltering. Entire fleets had deserted. Yet Reyes did not smile, did not rejoice. His satisfaction was tempered by the knowledge that humanity had finally revealed itself, and there would be no retreat into obscurity. Every maneuver, every decisive strike, was carving their place into the galaxy with indelible ink. He leaned forward, his voice low but resolute. "No glory. No cruelty. We finish this clean." His subordinates nodded, knowing that their restraint was not mercy, but control. In the small town where it began, Elena emerged from the church basement into a dawn painted red by the fires of wreckage still smoldering in the fields. Her daughter clung to her hand, eyes wide with wonder rather than fear. For the first time, the girl looked at the sky not as a ceiling of threat, but as a frontier. Elena breathed deeply, the air acrid yet alive, and allowed herself to feel the paradox of victory, relief laced with grief. Too many had been lost, and yet survival had hardened into defiance. Briggs joined her, revolver still at his side though its use had long since been eclipsed by weapons that scarred the stars. His uniform was stained, his eyes weary, but his voice steady. "Looks like we held the line." Elena glanced at him, offering a tired but genuine smile.
No.
The line moved. Now it's theirs to hold. She pointed upward, where streaks of human fleets cut across the morning sky. For centuries, humanity's wars had been fought on soil, in trenches, in deserts and oceans. Now the war was no longer bound to Earth. It had become something larger, something inescapable. On his crippled flagship, Xylan stood before a fractured council projection, its members' voices frantic, discordant. Some demanded total war, others begged for retreat. None agreed, none commanded. For the first time in memory, the Dominion's authority had fractured. Xylan raised his voice above the chaos. You still refuse to see. They do not fight for dominance. They fight for existence, and in that struggle, they are limitless. You will lose not because they are stronger, but because they cannot be broken. His words silenced the chamber. He had intended them as warning, but even as he spoke, he felt a strange clarity. Perhaps he was no longer speaking as an admiral of the Dominion, but as a witness to its end. Reyes's fleet struck at the Dominion heart with terrifying precision. Wormholes opened like knives, delivering squadrons of autonomous craft that swept through defenses before alarms could be raised. Railguns fired from positions hidden in asteroid fields, tearing apart command centers with surgical accuracy. Every human maneuver was quiet, calm, inexorable. There were no cries of triumph transmitted across channels, only clipped confirmations of objectives achieved. The silence unnerved the Volari more than any roar of victory could have. Briggs watched transmissions broadcast into the town square, images of Dominion strongholds falling, of enemy admirals surrendering, of once proud fleets burning. The townsfolk gathered, their faces lit by the flickering glow of alien defeat. Yet there was no cheering. Instead, there was a somber weight in the air, as if they all understood what Reyes knew in his bones. This was not an end. It was the rewriting of their place in the universe. Elena knelt beside her daughter, brushing soot from the girl's cheek. Remember this, she whispered. Not the fear, not the fire. Remember that we didn't bend. She knew her daughter would grow into a world forever changed, where humanity's strength would be both shield and burden. In the Volari capital, the once mighty banners of the Dominion hung torn. Rebels flooded the streets, seizing palaces and burning effigies of leaders who had dismissed humanity as insects. The psychological collapse was complete. Soldiers laid down arms not because they were defeated in combat, but because belief in their invincibility had been annihilated. Whispers spread like contagion. The humans are coming. The humans cannot be stopped. Xylan, stripped of his fleet and authority, awaited humanity's terms. When the human envoy arrived, not a warlord, not a conqueror, but a diplomat flanked by soldiers who carried themselves without arrogance, he braced for humiliation. Instead, the envoy's words were delivered with a calm finality. You are offered survival. Govern your people. Keep your honor. But your empire is finished. Xylan bowed his head, not out of subservience, but out of respect for an enemy who had fought without excess, who had won without cruelty. In that moment, he realized that humanity's true power was not in their weapons but in their restraint. Reyes received confirmation of surrender with no outward reaction. Inside, though, a tide of conflicting emotions surged. He thought of his son, of every life lost along the path to this day. Victory tasted of ashes, yet he knew it was necessary. He gathered his officers and spoke with deliberate weight. This is not conquest. This is survival. Let history show we offered peace, even when no one offered it to us. Back in the town, dawn burned brighter, clearing the smoke. Briggs walked among the ruins, offering quiet words to families emerging from shelters. Elena stood beside him, her daughter perched on her hip. Around them, the town was scarred but alive. They had been the bait, the spark. And though they bore the cost, they also bore the pride of having been the first line of defiance. As night fell again, Reyes recorded a message broadcast across the stars. His voice was calm, deliberate, and absolute. We did not seek this war, but you brought it to our soil, to our homes, to our children. Know this: humanity is united now. We do not conquer, but if struck, we will not merely defend. We will finish. To all who would test us, this is your warning. Xylan listened from the ruins of his capital, the words sinking deep. For the first time, he felt something unfamiliar, something dangerous, respect laced with fear. The Dominion was gone, but perhaps a new order could rise under human guidance. Elena tucked her daughter into bed beneath a patched roof, whispering promises of a future not yet written. Briggs sat on his porch, revolver resting in his lap, staring at the quiet sky where stars burned with silent fury. And in his command chamber, Rhea stood alone, the weight of victory pressing harder than the weight of battle had. Humanity had not asked for empire, but empire had come. He whispered to himself, voice barely audible over the hum of dormant machines. We never wanted the galaxy. His gaze hardened, the burden settling in his bones. But now it's ours to protect or to destroy. And with that, the war was over, but the story of humanity had only just begun.